véritable vedette planétaire grâce aux centaines de photos qu'il a publiées sur les réseaux sociaux depuis l'espace.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, fellow pipe fitters of data. I love that, Dale and Don. It is amazing what we can do when we organize ourselves together. And we try and use the intellect that we have and the inspiration that we've grown up with and the cooperation that's capable with communications as it exists today. It is amazing what we can accomplish together. But trying to manage complexity and change is really the business we're all in. How do you take ideas and motivations and then all of the random and unfocused data sources that feed into your life and yourself, how do you collate that all together and turn it into something that you're trying to accomplish? It's kind of the fundamental day-to-day focus of every single one of us. And there are lots of great examples in history of people doing just that, applying motivation, looking at the technology that exists, pushing the technology right to its edge, and giving us a collective capability we've never seen before. Perhaps the best example is Apollo 11. When Kennedy stood up in front of the podium down in Houston in the United States, when Kennedy made that speech, we will go to the moon by the end of the decade, not because it's easy, but because it is hard. He did that. The United States had done 4 orbits of the world at that point. Absolutely brand new, unproven technology. And yet he challenged an entire nation, really a whole world, to do something impossible and to invent all the stuff that needed to happen. And when it comes down to it, it's just people that get stuff done. And these 3 guys, they just look like any 3 guys anywhere, you know, just folks. But those 3 people did something incredible. They pushed our ability, our capability to manage complexity and change right to the very absolute limit. That's Neil and Mike and Buzz, Edwin. And they took an enormous risk. Change is all about risk, of course. Anything worthwhile in life is all about risk. But what those guys did was incredible. When they were coming down to land, they were in a little ship. Mike was orbiting the world in the little thing they called Columbia. But Neil and Buzz were floating weightless, wearing their spacesuits inside their little lunar lander, which they called Eagle, great name for a spaceship. And they were flying Eagle down to the surface. And the computers on board were controlling it. It had the best, most powerful computers capable at the time. It had a full 8K of memory. How many bits were you guys talking about? You know, you got your Giga and your Tera and your whatever. They had 8K of memory. And it was overloading all the way down. There was a 27-year-old guy in the front row of Mission Control who watched the buffer constantly overloading and giving out error messages, who gave them clearance to continue. But they got down close enough where then the vehicle pitched over, with Neil and Buzz floating, looking out the window, and heading for the Tranquility base area where they were going to touch down, the Sea of Tranquility. And when they started getting close, with Neil and Buzz looking out the window, they realized their data was all wrong. They hadn't done a proper map of the area. There wasn't sufficient terrain data for them to draw the correct conclusion. And when they got there, it was covered in boulders. They couldn't touch Eagle Down in that spot. So that guy on the left grabbed the controls, picked up Eagle, and started flying around, trying to recover from the failure to have the correct data at the time he needed it, trying to manage the complexity that flowed from it. So with these two guys, it's Buzz and Neil looking for a parking spot on the moon. And with them flying the vehicle by hand, eventually they found a smooth spot, brought it over, Neil pitched it up vertical, and then very carefully lowered it with Buzz calling altitudes, and then the probe touched the ground, Buzz yelled contact, and then Neil put it on the surface and called down Houston Tranquility Base, here the Eagle has landed. When Neil touched that thing down, he had 16 seconds of fuel left. That's how close it came. From Kennedy's pronouncement, all of the millions of people that had worked on the program, but it all ended up at that one moment of him making the right call. And amazingly enough, he succeeded and got it on the surface and started giving us the chance to understand in person something beyond our planet. It's an immensely important technological achievement. It was huge scientifically. We know where the moon came from as a result of their work. We understand planets and planetary geology. But it also inspired a generation. There have been more PhDs per capita in the 10 years after Apollo than ever before or ever since. It changed people's decision-making and their behavior because they were inspired by this great idea and then the people that made it happen. And it is amazing what has happened since. During my career, in 21 years as an astronaut, I had the chance to fly in space 3 times. And like always, it's mostly just dog work. It's mostly just being a pipe fitter. You're just working away and nobody notices what you're up to. But once in a while, you get to do something like this. 12, 11, 10, 9, it's louder than that. This is an amazing human creation. And I think if you haven't gotten up close to one and thought about it, it sort of looks like a finished product. It looks like it had to be that way. But of course, a space shuttle is just a bunch of data. It's just a bunch of ideas. And each one's small and discrete. But every single one of those little flashes of inspiration that somebody then said, hey, that might even work. And then if I bolt that idea to this idea, if I link those two things together, and enough of those, we could build one of those. We could make something happen that's never happened before. And what an amazing ship. I flew this twice. It had a huge amount of power that just absolutely dwarfs you. 80 million horsepower. 80 million. The great big new super monster Hemi sports cars that are coming out right now, you see the ads for them, they're kind of ridiculous. They have like 800 horsepower. 80 million horsepower, this thing. It just rams you in the small of the back, jams you up off the earth. You go through the speed of sound in 45 seconds, accelerating straight up. And just vibrating you and crushing you into your chair. If you want to focus, you have to grab onto the handrail and pull your head forward so your neck can soak up all the vibrations, so your eyes can see all the instruments in front of you. And your question you're constantly asking is, what's the next thing that's going to kill me? What's the next thing? What's the next thing? You're looking at this wall of information that's pouring out of all the instruments in front of you. There's about 500 switches, a whole bunch of different displays, and you are the ultimate attuned data processor at that point, trying to recognize the failure as it happens so that you can respond properly, so you can accomplish this incredible goal that everyone's giving you the task of doing. It's an amazing ride. After 2 minutes, those huge white solids, they're just a big tube of explosive. That's all they are. Couldn't be simpler. It's like if you just made a great big cylinder and filled it up with solid explosive and then lit the bottom and ran away. That's all those things are. And when you light them, you can't shut them off. You can't jettison them. You can't throttle them. When you have lit those great big solid rockets, you are going somewhere, for sure. There's 2 of them. You hope that they both light, otherwise it'll be this really short little flight. No, they'll name a school after you or something. But they burn for about 2 minutes, and then you're above the air, and they explode off and fall into the ocean, and then it's another 6 minutes of super powerful, steady, liquid, smooth ride off those hydrogen-burning engines, just heavier and heavier acceleration, until actually it starts accelerating like this beautifully oiled piston so hard that it would rip itself in half. And we grab the throttles if the computers don't do it right and bring it back to idle just to keep the vehicle from tearing itself off the tank. Until finally, after about 8 minutes and 42 seconds or so, if all the data's right, you're just exactly where you're supposed to be, right direction, right speed, right everything, and the engine's shut off, and you're weightless. If you get the chance, I really recommend you take a ride like that. It is an amazing experience. But that's me there in my first simulator. But I put it up just because that's what is possible, and the dreams begin over there for every single one of us, and for your kids as well. How do you inspire people? What is the end goal they're trying to accomplish? And then how do you make each of the small little incremental decisions and inventions that enables your dreams to come true? That's really what every single one of you does for a living, is put those 3 things in sequence. And it's worth maybe constantly iterating to yourself, what is it I'm trying to accomplish? What skills do I have and what don't I have yet to try and enable that to happen? And how am I measuring what's happening so that on each little decision it's taking me closer to what I'm trying to do? Because when those engines shut off and you float over to the window, it is incredible what this new technology, what this new invention has allowed us to see. Can you just dim the lights for a sec, guys? Is that hard to do? I just want to look at the pictures for a minute. To be able to glance out the window and see that used to be not just hard, but impossible. And now you just glance out the window and there's Cuba and the Bahamas and the Florida Keys and Florida and the launch pad and Atlanta and New York and the cloud over the Great Lakes and the universe. And that's just out your left window. And 10 minutes later, you're over England. In 10 minutes, you cross the Atlantic. You know, the time it takes to go brew a cup of tea. And you're there looking at all of the UK and Ireland and a little bit of France, all the way up to the Northern Lights and the hint of the sun on the other side of the world. And 40 minutes later, you're over Australia, where you can see just raw outback underneath you, millions of years, tens of millions of years of erosion, no volcanoes, no earthquakes, just slow erosion grinding the mountains and some of the oldest rock on Earth into powder and blowing it around in the dryness of the outback, just like casual modern art. And then up and across where you can see all of Tokyo Harbor and Mount Fuji over there on the right. Just think of the thousands of years of settlement and decision making and information and people that have come and gone. and the geology and the geography all in one glance. And we crossed the whole Pacific in a half hour and come up in a place like San Fran here. I love this picture just because of the clarity, all the hydrology of it. You can see the Golden Gate and Alcatraz and the airport and everything. You could also see the San Andreas Fault, just clear as a bell, that slippage of one plate against the other right there as California slowly falls into the sea. But you can see where the earthquakes come from. There's the one over here in Oakland, but the San Andreas is just so dead clear. And suddenly all of that is just laid out underneath you with a clarity and an undeniable, frank realism that we've only just imagined in the past. And this is the ship that allows us to see that now. This is where that little kid in a cardboard box got to, and all of us who have managed to try and imagine and challenge ourselves to build the International Space Station. It's been up there since '98, so coming up on 20 years since we launched the first piece. It's been around the world well over 100,000 times. We run about 200 experiments on board. We look at the universe, the alpha magnetic spectrometer, trying to collect subatomic particles to explain what dark matter and dark energy are. We look at the Earth, of course, and there are all sorts of sensors looking at the atmosphere and looking at the surface of the world. And we run all sorts of experiments in the inside. An amazing first permanent step away from the world. And people started living there in the fall of 2000. So if your kids are 16 and a half or younger, they've never been alive when human beings weren't off the planet. This is our first great permanent step away from home as a species. Purely the result of a crazy idea, challenging people to do things that they never would have tried otherwise, and then the slow incremental advance of technology based on the data that comes back to improve our understanding of the world and the universe around it. And it's such a fun place to be. I mean, if you spill your water on Earth, it's kind of boring, really. It's probably not even encouraged here, I guess, inside the convention center. But you know, so you don't do it much. But on orbit, that's what your water does when you spill it. So we spill our water all the time, just because it floats around like this living. Well, it just changes your expectation, and therefore there's a delight in the newness of it. Is it like a pulsating jellyfish floating around inside the ship? Or you can pull your knees up to your chest and just do 1,000 somersaults. You can fly. It's magic, and yet it's a new reality purely as the direct, definitive result of each of our collective decision-making. Our ability to put ourselves in an environment that was just impossible, unimaginable. Even when I was born, no one had ever flown in space. All of this is way shorter than one complete lifetime. And these are the folks that were in my crew. Managing complexity and change. It's a nice little catchphrase, but what does that really mean? It always just comes down to each one of us. How are we going to get ready to do the things that are expected of us, that we expect of ourselves, that allow us to try and accomplish what we're trying to do? Me with Pavel there, who looks like Charles Bronson, and Sasha, who's a rookie, and Roman, and Chris, and Tom. Trying to build a group of people that no matter what we were faced with, no matter what went wrong, we somehow within the six of us would have the skills and the proven practiced ability so that when everything came to a point, when all of a sudden everything was just going bad, we would be able to respond properly to accomplish what we were trying to do. Trying to visualize failure. It's what astronauts do. It's another way to say managing complexity and change. Visualize failure. Visualizing success, to me, that's just fluffy. I mean, if you get success, that's easy. I mean, why worry about it? Visualizing failure is the only way you ever have a chance of completing something as complex as spaceflight. And then once you've identified, what's the most likely thing that's going to kill us? What's it going to look like? So I know for sure that's what it is. And then what is it that I have to do to kill that dragon? How do I beat that thing? And I probably don't know how to do it yet. So let's figure out all the data. Let's find out truly what's causing the problem, and then let's practice it over and over and over again, so that if that ever happens, we're ready for it. And then let's move on to the next failure, and the next failure, and the next failure. And in my 21 years in the office, in the astronaut office, that's what we did every day, is visualize failure and try and change who we were so that we had a better chance of succeeding. But that's how explorers have always done it. That's how we drew this map. And you don't have to look back very far in order to think just how little we knew just a very short time ago. There was a huge data revolution, of course, in the 1400s. Their internet, in 1440, the combination of sort of a political structure, a freeing up of academic thought, improved metallurgy, they all came together so that this guy in Germany could figure out how to build metal type that was strong and reliable enough, and a big hydraulic press so that he could start printing ideas. The Gutenberg printing press in 1440. And by 1500, less than one lifetime later, they had printed 2 million volumes. 2 million volumes. And that's just the internet of the 1400s. Ideas that used to be unattainable, or secret, or just hand-copied by scribes, suddenly became available to everyone. Must have really pissed off the scribes union, I bet. I bet they were really unhappy with it. But it was also a time of exploration. And the Portuguese in the 1400s had one of the king's sons, Henry, who started the university in Lisbon. But what he really stressed was the improvement of knowledge and skill. And he brought together all that they knew and the best maps of the world, invented a new ship that they called the caravel, shallow draft with better sails, more maneuverable. And they started to explore off the coast of Portugal. First, initially out to the islands, and then down to the Barbary coast of Africa to stop all the raids, until finally, by the late 1400s, in 1488, for the very first time, someone sailed around the tip of Africa. And then in 1498, Vasco da Gama went around and made it all the way to India and opened up a whole new part of the world to trade and to communication. A huge development. And of course, in 1492, with a displaced Italian with not enough funding, had to put together an international consortium and convince the government and a bunch of investors, but he convinced them, and in 1492, Columbus discovered Asia. Well, close anyway, but he thought he was in Asia. But that quest for trying to use technology to allow us to accomplish something that had never been done before. And one of the guys who was huge, one of the guys who was a little young man sitting in a box dreaming about this while those guys were doing all that was Magellan. And in 1519, Magellan was the very first of us, the first person ever to circumnavigate the world, or at least his crew. They launched out of Spain, a Portuguese sailor, again, building on the back of the data that other people had gathered, but launching off into an incredible risk, sailed with 5 ships and 241 men, and it took them 3 months to cross the Atlantic, about 4 months to get down the coast of South America. They were in what is now called the Strait of Magellan. They were in there for 36 days, I think. Their crew mutinied. He had to kill one of the other captains to keep a mutiny from just taking over the whole thing. They lost ships along the way. Magellan himself was killed in the Philippines when he was trying to build alliances and claim the land for Spain. And the rest of his crew continued. And after 3 years, it took 3 years, but Elcano, his last captain, with one remaining ship out of the 5, which was the Victoria, completed the voyage. It took 241 people and 5 ships and 3 years to do the very first circumnavigation of the Earth, to try and build our understanding of ourselves. An amazing sequence of events, and not that long ago. And a little more recently, this crew, people from all around the world, put together by an international consortium, combination of governments and organizations and agencies and academics and businesses on board this ship called Endeavour, which was named for Captain Cook's ship. Cook was the first of the long-range voyagers who managed to understand scurvy and defeat scurvy. It took hundreds of years. Scurvy eventually killed that captain that circumnavigated the world. But those guys on that ship launched with a similar goal, to try and understand the world better. And this is how they outfitted Endeavour for that ship. In the bay of Endeavour, in the back, was a huge radar, 2 different frequencies, C-band and X-band. And the idea was that the speed a shuttle goes, 8 kilometers a second, if they could stay up long enough, they could map the entire world. But if you could put an extra receiver out on a long boom, that outboard antenna, sort of a little parasite receiver about 80 meters out, no, 60 meters out, then you can get 3-dimensional data for the world, real time. You can use the speed and the interferometry in order to start mapping the world. And that was the task of that crew on board Endeavour when they launched in 2000. That's what that boom looks like. Deployed, you can see the payload bay of the shuttle. And here's the idea of it is the main signal coming down, X-band, C-band, the signal coming back up to the main receivers inside, and then a corresponding signal coming to the antenna out on the end, and drawing a strip about 250 kilometers wide around the world. And because the world turns underneath you, if you go around enough times, you can map the entire world in about a week and a half. There's Janet deploying that mast. She's assisted by Gerhard Thiele, an astronaut from the German Space Agency, from the European Space Agency. And like any Endeavour, it looked perfect at first. And they got the antenna deployed. But you can imagine how hard a vehicle this is to control. You know, the shuttle is a beast of a machine to fly at any rate. And when you put a big mass, 60 meters way out to one side, gravity pulls on both and constantly tries to torque you and spin you. And as you're trying to get this beautiful swath of the world and map it in 3 dimensions, you're constantly plagued by attitude control. And the way we solved the problem was simple. We thought, why don't we just run a little hose, lovely solution, run a little hose all the way out to the tip, and just squirt a tiny little bit of gas out there, like nitrogen or just air, and squirt it out there because the righting force on the shuttle was about the weight of a Canadian $2 coin, about the weight of a toonie. It was constantly pushing way out on the tip there to try and make the vehicle respond to the difference of gravity pulling on the mass of the shuttle versus the mass. But they got to orbit, they deployed the antenna, they started collecting data, but then that little gas tube that was going all the way out to the end blew a diaphragm, and suddenly the vehicle couldn't point the right way anymore. And every time you fire the thrusters, big flexible structure, it would shake the whole thing, mess up all the data. A real misery of a problem to deal with, to try and take this. It had been 7 years in the making, and trying to make all this thing work. Put all the pressure, of course, on the crew on board, on Leroy Kane there, and Wayne Hale working in mission control. We worked around the clock. We redid all of the math for the control of the space shuttle. We worked with Draper Labs. We redefined how the thruster firings would work. We responded real time and changed how we operated after all those years of preparation. And amazingly enough, in 11 days, we mapped everything from 57 degrees south to 60 degrees north. We covered 99.96% of the land of the world in that time that we were up there. In just 11 days. Magellan would have been jealous, shocked, around the world every 92 minutes. And that data took about a year to reduce. It was about 12 terabytes of data. At the time, we couldn't downlink the data. We had to change, they had huge high data tapes. They had to change the tapes every 20 minutes on board for the whole 11 days, 24 hours a day, just to try and gather all the precious data so it didn't get lost. Once the data got back to Earth, it took about 9 months to get the basic reduction, start releasing it to the world. And in 2014, at its highest resolution, it's been released to the whole world. I think the best resolution is about 10 meters of relative accuracy. Every place in the whole world, horizontal and vertical, a three-dimensional map of the whole world. And be able suddenly, if you think of Livingston and all of the explorers and all of the unknowns of the Dark Continent even, where suddenly we have an unprecedented ability to understand the world around us. And then to take advantage of that. Just like every exploration has ever happened. But things always go wrong. It's what is normal in all of our businesses. It sure wasn't easy in the early 90s putting SAFE together, making that software work, having no bugs, trying to make it all work. And on my third space flight, when I was on board the space station, when it was 4 days before we came home, 4 days before we came back to port, on this huge orbiting laboratory, Pavel, that cosmonaut that looks like Charles Bronson, was looking out the window of his bedroom. There's little tiny bedrooms on a spaceship. Oh, and by the way, I think if anybody has questions at the end, we'll have a couple minutes. I'll do my best to try and answer questions if you have any. But Pavel was looking out the window of his bedroom, and he saw something really weird out on our ship with our great big sails. And he couldn't figure out what it was. He came floating up through the ship to me, all excited, you know, he doesn't speak English very well. I'm up at the front doing this nanotechnology experiment. Pavel's like, hey, Chris, я вижу, что ты вокруг, очень интересно. Крис, похоже, как, я не уверен, ты знаешь, еще на станции мира, похоже, как спичь, или как фейерверки, может быть. Это очень странное. Крис, чувствуешь, что что-нибудь, может быть, надо посмотреть. Крис, посмотрите меня. And off he floated, you know, and I'm like, what? Because when Pavel was talking about, Pavel had said, hey, Chris, hey, sorry to bug you, but hey, there's something weird going on outside. I saw it out of my bedroom. There's like sparks or fireworks or something out there. Did Houston say anything? I think you should have a look. Follow me. I just pictured every one of those ship's captains in the past. Something serious is wrong with my ship. Somebody's seen it. Everything's come to a point. What do we do now? This is what Pasha was talking about.
I'm just talking to Dom and Chris. It sounds like it backed up completely with this a very steady stream of flakes or bits coming out coming pure near and then rotating towards the forward, and you know as the truss is rotating.
So that's not good. You do not, if you're on a spaceship, you don't want to look out the window and see stuff spewing out of your spaceship. Because no matter what it is, you have a limited amount of it. Whatever it was. And whenever it runs out, you're going to miss it. Whatever. So, time to act. But what do? So I called down to Houston, to Mission Control, just like Kevin and Janet and everybody had done during STS-99, because we have good enough communications. But really, the people back at home base, they can try and help you. But for an astronaut, Earth is sort of just like a help desk, really, sort of. You know, what can they do, really? So you call them, and you know, they say, stand by, you know, what else can they do? And so I got my crew together, we took great detailed pictures of the stuff spewing out. We could see it was individual crystals. Some were coming out fast, some coming out slow. We watched all the data on board, but actually Houston has far better data insight on all the different parameters of the space station than we do on board. And about 4 hours later, Houston called back and said, it's liquid ammonia. It's your main coolant of the whole ship, and it's leaking at a heck of a rate. Stand by. You know? So I knew we were going to have to do a spacewalk. We were going to have to go outside to fix it. Chris and Tom had done a spacewalk out in that part of the station before, so they were the logical choices. And it takes about 9 days to put a spacewalk together normally, maybe 8 days if we hurry. Because Houston wants to practice and develop the procedures and visualize failure and hammer it all flat, get it all working. But because the leak was so bad, when we woke up the next morning, 12 hours later, there was a note from Houston saying, good morning, you're doing a spacewalk tomorrow on 1 day's notice. We don't have procedures yet, but if we don't do this spacewalk now, we're going to run out of coolant, and we won't be able to generate electricity to control the batteries, and won't be able to cool the cabin. So we're going to have to abandon ship if we don't get this fixed tomorrow. So start working. So a really bad time to start visualizing failure, or to think about how you're going to manage this particular complexity. But everybody in the crew was spacewalk qualified. Pavel and I got Chris and Tom dressed that Saturday morning, and we put them out into the void of space. And it is, it's an interesting place to work. The temperature on Chris's right shoulder here is minus 140 Celsius. On his left shoulder in the direct sun, it's plus 150 Celsius. Because there's no air to soak up the energy and move the temperature around your body. And you're constantly sandblasted by the universe. There's constant individual atoms and things hitting your suit. The suit is 16 layers thick, and the suit is pressurized to about the same pressure as an indoor volleyball. So it resists every motion of your body. It's like being on a bench press machine for the whole time you're outside. You come in all beat up with your skin worn through. You come in bloody out of a spacewalk. But Tom came in with nerve damage in both hands. But they spent about 5.5 hours outside working out there. They removed the big leaking thing about the size of this sign, great big thing. Undid it all, removed it. NASA had visualized failure and put a spare up there. They got the new one in place. All the electrical connections, the plumbing connections, all the mechanicals, put the whole thing really carefully, cinched it all up tight, did everything right. We slowly repressurized, and we fixed it. We saved it in and fixed the leak. But not by any sort of inevitability. It was purely because we knew what we were trying to accomplish. We had gathered skills in the quiet that exists most of the time to become ready for things so that when the moment arrived, we were people who could deal with it. We had practiced and anticipated. And to me, that's the very essence of data management. Data is just a bunch of noise until you do something with it. And then the process of doing something into it and turning it into something useful is completely a decisional process of how to visualize failure and get past it to accomplish your objective. Can you kill the lights once more for me, please? I was Canada's first spacewalker. I've done 2 spacewalks. This is just a spectacular human experience. To be out holding on to a spaceship with one hand. And you're going around the world every hour and a half. So I was outside over 2 walks for 15 hours. So I went around the world 10 times while I was outside. You know, to think of those early explorers, the trials they went through, and my incredibly privileged perspective to see the world that way. And then to look the other direction, at the immensity and the endlessness and the blackness of everything else, and have it 3-dimensionally around you. And the Earth is not where you are. The Earth is just a planet in the distance. It's like looking at the moon. When you look at the moon, you don't feel like you're on the moon or from the moon. And it's the same out on a spacewalk. You don't feel like you're on the Earth or from the Earth. The Earth is just a planet in the distance, and you are out in the universe. It's an amazing early step to where we're going next. And at one point, coming across the Indian Ocean with the lights off in the dark side of the world, we went through the southern lights while I was outside. And they were pouring by around my body and all around the ship and between my legs. And when Magellan first got out into the Pacific, when things were the toughest after coming through that strait, they actually had St. Elmo's fire up on the top of their mast when they were facing one of the most dire moments. This electromagnetic interaction between the magnetosphere and the energy of the sun and those explorers on the ground. They didn't really understand it, but they just saw it as a beautiful and magnificent sign that they should continue on their voyage. And to be able to experience this, to have the aurora of the world not just be a scientific idea, but a palpable human experience all around me is just one of the highlights of my entire life. And it's something we now have as part, you can bring the lights up again, please. It's part of what we do now. This is just something that we have accomplished by applying the best of our data management, the best of our building on what to do next. But launch is still the hardest thing. It's intriguing to see who is challenging that. Who are the Henry the Navigators and the Vasco da Gamas of today? And these three tech entrepreneurs are all trying to change the launch. That's, of course, Richard Branson with Virgin, and Jeff Bezos of Amazon. He has a company called Blue Origin. He's put a spaceship up 3 times already. And then Elon Musk of PayPal and Tesla, but he has a space company called SpaceX. All 3 of them are chasing data and communication in a way that's unprecedented. These 3 guys are trying to make launch simpler and therefore cheaper and safer, so that they can start throwing little transceivers up. And if you can get a couple hundred little transceivers up, you can give the whole world Wi-Fi. And that's what those 3 guys are pursuing. Just like the King of Spain when he launched Columbus, they're pursuing a technology and an exploration, but with the intention that they're going to make a big profit at the end of it. That's what those 3 folks are chasing. Elon's got kind of the coolest idea. His crazy challenge is that big white rocket that falls into the ocean. What? It's expensive. Why throw it away every launch? What if, and it's never going to work, but what if we could change things so that, and what if is a wonderful question, but what if we could bring that rocket back and land it? Because it costs about $40 million. And as Elon has said, if $40 million was falling out of the sky, wouldn't you try and catch some of it? You know? And so that's what he challenged his crew to do. But of course, it's going to fail. Things always go wrong. And so anticipating failure, visualizing failure, they build these barges. And every time he's launching a rocket, instead of just letting that first piece fall into the ocean and become jetsam, or maybe that's Watson. No, it's jetsam. Just rather than having it turn into garbage, why not try and land it on one of these barges, just so it doesn't risk unnecessarily innocent life? And his very first try a couple years ago went like this. Pretty good. Made it back to the barge, you know, that's good. But obviously some serious problems, but that's okay. You learn the most when things go wrong. Initial success teaches you nothing. Initial success just reinforces a lack of preparation and bad habits. And the problems are always going to be out there. So having a failure early is great. They changed a bunch of things, and just a little over a year ago, for the very first time, on a day when the wind was blowing hard, the wind was blowing 50 knots, 50 knots. You can see the white caps. This is what that team of folks did. That rocket was in space 6 minutes before. And there it is now sitting on the barge, waiting to come in. And they've reused that rocket since. They took it, checked it out, saw that it was just kind of dirty, cleaned everything up, put it back on the launch pad, filled it back up, and launched it again. We now live in an era of reusable first-stage rockets. Truly reusable. And it's not a little thing. That is a big rocket. And that is what we're now capable of doing. Give yourself a crazy goal, gather the skills with a group of people, constantly challenge yourself as to what you don't know how to do yet, and then repeat over and over, what are you going to do next? And it's amazing where it's taken us. And after the space station, we'll go to the next logical place, not just like Neil and Buzz to show that we can, but to actually, not just Magellan or whomever to show that we can, but actually start settlement of the moon. And it'll be building on Elon's manned vehicle that's coming up later this year, next year, Dragon. The one that Boeing has built that should be launching next year, called the Starliner. And that frees up NASA to really get in the business of exploration with the vehicle they're building, they call Orion, that can take us to the moon, orbit the moon, even go beyond the moon. that natural straight continuation from when Henry the Navigator was designing his caravel ship, and they were using astrolabes and quadrants to try and figure out latitude, and still couldn't even figure out longitude. One small, great idea at a time, taking us to the point where this is now part of what we all do. And that's what Vancouver looks like from on board the space station. Just a quick glance down. You get so much information from reflection of water. The cameras, Planet, which is a great company, and Earthcast here in this building, both terrific companies, but of course the intuition of the human eye, the ability to look at something and go, whoa, that wasn't what I expected. The cunning and the adaptability and the interpretation of us is always the natural extrapolation from just the raw data that comes from machines. And putting the two together is really the whole decision-making process. And understanding our Earth like a way we've never understood it before, so that we can start to make informed decisions. And you have to get over the huge bulk of ignorance. People don't like change. People like stuff the way it is. And change, though, is necessary. There's a great book by an Italian author called The Leopard, and one of the lines in it, it's a novel, but one of the lines in it is, if you want things to stay the same, things are going to have to change. And it's funny, but it's true. Things are changing, and our pace of change is accelerating, and that only puts a heavier burden on us in order to change who we are and our ability and the people that follow after us. All right, I'll bring us back to Earth, and then I'll see if anybody has any questions. On my third flight, I was the pilot of the Russian Soyuz. We sit in that little gold section in the middle, that little bell-shaped capsule. The others, they burn up in the atmosphere. They like a meteorite. The friction from the air melts them. And the only part that can survive is this little capsule about the size of a minivan, as it comes plummeting into the Earth's atmosphere at 8 kilometers a second. And it's just big enough for 3 people inside. That is the exploration vessel of today. That's what it looks like. It's a great little ship, tough as nails, proven. It's what we've always gone to the space station and back with. A really good little lifeboat and a great way to get there and back. And it comes scorched into the atmosphere. We use friction from the air to slow down, basically sailing back into the atmosphere. But you can steer it and land it anywhere on Earth within about a 15-kilometer circle. It's a great little ship. Once you get down where the air is thick, the parachute automatically deploys, hopefully. And then just before you hit the ground, these little retro rockets fire, just to turn a horrible crash into a survivable crash. This is what it looks like.
And you can see one of those search and recovery helicopters. Once again, that helicopter, part of a dozen such Russian Mi-8 helicopters. Touchdown, 3:14.
Touchdown. It is like a crash. I mean, take that, Earth. And you don't just go thunk, but you're landing out in the prairies, the steppes of Kazakhstan. And so it's always windy out in the prairies, of course. So you're not just coming vertical, but you're coming horizontal. And so it's as if you'd taken the capsule and put it on the top of a big truck, a big semi, and it was driving across a field at 25 miles an hour, and then you pushed it off the top of the semi. That's about your vertical and horizontal speed when you hit the ground. So it goes bang, and then and then rolls to a stop. And that's our ship. That's our vessel, returned after its 6-month voyage, with all the scorch marks on the outside, and the 3 of us on the inside. And I was NASA's director in Russia and lived there for several years, and just terrific, practical northern people. Their politics to me are just inexcusable. It's just an anachronistic, fearful mess, like so much of politics is. But the people are just so good, and a great sense of tradition and cultural awareness and pride that we lack in Canada. We just haven't been around long enough to develop it. But a real practical nature to thinking as well, because they're northern people and it gets cold in the winter, so you got to get ready. So good ones to welcome you home. They get out of their helicopters and they roll the ship so that the three of us are hanging the right way inside, open up the hatch, they drag us out one at a time, and then they brought along these cheap deck chairs, and they plunk you down into a deck chair, and then they give you a cup of tea. Because tea is good. And you feel terrible. I mean, you just feel awful. When Magellan's crew, when those last 18 guys out of the original 241 came limping into port after 3 years, they'd been starved multiple times, emaciated, subjected to scurvy, all sorts of problems, and they were just barely hanging on when they get back. And we're a lot healthier than that, but it's still a pretty rude readaptation to come home. Your balance system is messed up. It smells, like Earth, like Kazakhstan. You're queasy, you're exhausted. You just feel terrible. You just want to throw up, go lie down somewhere. But you're that little kid in a box, and so you pretend, and you stick your thumb up, and you hope somebody takes that picture right away. And then you go throw up. But that's what it's like in our business. How we take what seems like an impossible idea of taking all of that wild amount of forestry data that existed in BC and building up to the early 90s, and somehow turning it into something useful, something that we can build on. Take a crazy challenge, turn it into discrete, bite-sized pieces of data that people can then think on and use, and allow us then to do something that was previously unimaginable. And to make that as so much part of normal life that everybody can build on it without even questioning it, and improve our understanding and relative quality of life to a level that we've never seen before as a species and a planet. All right, so I don't know if we have any questions. If people, do you have any questions on the computer there? I'll repeat. Go ahead. There you go.
Okay, cool. So yeah, we had a couple questions come in. If you guys have more, you can enter them there. But the first one, what do you find is more important in pressure situations, thought or instinct?
What do I think is more important in a pressure situation, thought or instinct? Actually, the job of an astronaut is to change what your instincts are. Because your main instinct would be to flee, I think. That's why your instinctive response to danger is an injection of adrenaline into your veins. Because for a brief adrenaline's bad for you. It's destructive to your body. You can't sustain it. But for a brief period, you're faster than you've ever been fast before, and you're braver and you're stronger. And so you can hopefully use this multi-million year evolved chemical heightened state in order to elude a danger, a saber-toothed tiger or whatever. But that's not how you fly a spaceship. And in fact, you don't want any adrenaline in your veins flying a spaceship. You want to be as coldly rational and calm and competent as possible. And so, in fact, the job of all of us, but it's maybe exaggerated for an astronaut, is to change your instincts so that you're not just, a beast, just going with a million years of evolution, but you're a thinking being, tempering your gut instinct to do actually the thing that needs doing. And so what we need to do is change the long-term thinking, but also the split-second thinking, so that when you see this red light on, your hand is immediately reaching for the response, which is now your instinct, which would not have been. So I think the right answer is you need to constantly evolve and change who you are so that your instincts are different. And I think those questions are coming through that website, right?
Yes, they are.
Okay. So if anybody has typed questions in, that's how they're getting up on the screen. If you have a question, just stick your hand up too, and I'll just repeat it for folks if you'd like also. Do you have any others on your computer?
Yes. What do you miss most about being in space?
What do I miss most about being in space? I'm not the type of guy that spends much time missing things. I find to miss things, you have to look backwards. And that's not where your life is going. Or if you spend all your time looking backwards, then that means you've stopped. And so I'm really interested in the stuff that's happened, and I'm proud of it, and I work really hard at it. I mean, I used to be a fighter pilot, and I used to intercept Soviet bombers off the east coast of North America as they were practicing cruise missile launches in North America. That was hard and necessary and interesting in the height of the Cold War. And I was a test pilot, and that was fascinating, testing a hydrogen-burning engine so we can develop hypersonic airplanes and putting it on the wingtip of an F-18 to try and make that work. And I was a downhill ski racer in my teens and early 20s. That was fascinating. I love that too. But that's not what I'm doing now. So I love all the things that I've done in the past that brought me to where I am now. But I don't spend much time stopped looking backwards. I think there's so much stuff I don't know how to do yet and I want to do next. And that's what I really focus on. And there's all sorts of stuff I don't know anything about. So to me, that's the really interesting part of life, is to take what life has given you so far and use it sort of as a springboard to go forward. There are people that I miss. And I've had 3 dogs that have lived their whole natural life, and I miss those dogs, you know, because that's another sentient, beloved being. And I've been in a dangerous profession my whole life. I've had lots of good friends die, and they died young, and I miss those people. But things are just what got you to where you are today. So I love the experience, but I don't spend much time missing it. And feel free to just stick your hand up. Yes, sir. When will we land on Mars? Well, we already have multiple times, of course. We have rovers driving around on Mars, and it's hard to land on Mars. Oh, you have a person landing on Mars. That's sort of like 1490 saying, when are we going to, you know, sail and go to Asia? There's so much stuff we don't know. I mean, when Columbus launched west, he didn't know how to use a quadrant or an astrolabe. If you look at his data, he fudged it the whole way. He just went by dead reckoning. And they had recently figured out the trade winds. So they knew that they would blow mostly this direction, close to the coast, south, close to the African coast, and from the direction. But it was just pure dead reckoning. He was faking the whole thing. And he didn't know the diameter of the world. They had the numbers completely wrong. They'd forgotten what Eratosthenes had figured out in 300 BC, who had figured out the circumference of the world almost exactly, just by a really cool thought experiment. But he was using a Ptolemaic map, I think, that was way off on diameter, had the whole thing wrong, but they still explored anyway. And to ask him, hey, when are we gonna live in North America? There were so many things that had to be invented and so hard to visualize. And also there was very little profit to be made at that time. So you needed a big government consortium to recognize that this may not be a short-term profit, but for society at large, for this nation, for the planet, this is a thing worth doing. So let's fund it for a while and then let businesses like Virgin and such move into it and start making profit, or Planet, or Earthcast. So when are we going to go to Mars? First, we're learning a lot on station. We have stuff go wrong on station all the time. Had a box fail on the weekend. Peggy and Jack went outside on a spacewalk day before yesterday. No, yesterday. And fixed it. We're testing all sorts of equipment. I think we'll go to the moon because the moon's only 3 days away, and we're going to get it wrong. And we don't want to kill, 200 and whatever of our crew. We want to try and optimize our chances for success. So we have to invent different engines, I think, before we'll ever go to Mars. I do not think, personally, I don't think we will go to Mars with the engine technology that exists today. It'd be like trying to set up commercial flights to Australia from Europe in 1917. Flight existed, but it wasn't even radial engines, it was rotary engines. It was really bad and unreliable technology. And that's sort of where we are in spaceflight. But that's what we're working on. But the pace of acceleration, or pace of invention and discovery is accelerating. So I think space station will be up there for another 8 or 10 years, to 2028 or so. And then we'll go to the moon, sort of like Antarctica for the last 100 years. And then eventually we'll have learned enough and be confident enough that we can turn tail to Earth and go to Mars. There's no big rush. You know, Elon has set it as a crazy goal for his crew. He has done that Kennedy casting down of the challenge. Because if you set a bar high enough, there will be a subset of us that will always try and get over it. And that's a great human trait. But if you don't inspire people, they won't. So I admire him for doing it. But Mars is further away than most people think. And it'll take a little while to get there. My guess, 2050, maybe. We'll see. But that's just a wild guess. Depends what we invent. Yes, sir?
What's happening with all the school-age kids and all your broadcasts?
What's happening with all the school-age kids and how do they follow along with everything? I get to speak in a lot of schools, actually. I've spoken in schools for the last 25 years. I use Skype now, and I just tie directly in. It's a program I've been doing for about 10 years. I call it on the lunch pad, because I do it at lunch hour. And for a half hour, I just work with kids in a school across Canada, around the world. I've done that many, many times. I've written 3 books about it. I make videos about it all the time. And I think the beauty of having that direct experience with schools is you get to see an actual reflection of the level of interest that's out there. And a 9-year-old kid right now is just as interested and inspired and challenged and hopeful as my group of 9-year-old kids was. It's just, we just sort of lose touch when you get older. You think somehow that your parents understood you when you were 9, or you're going to understand your kids when they're 9. And I think if you look at our societal reflections of interest, just in our popular media, look at, Gravity and Interstellar and The Martian and Passengers and Moon and all the other Life, the movies that are on, they show the continuing fascination and generic interest with trying to understand the rest of everything that exists. And that's amplified with the little ones. And so I think it's normal. And what we need to do, and companies all, I think, have some level of civic responsibility, of course, is to take some of the profit that we make and invest it back in the education of our little ones. How do you let them see the possibilities that exist within their lives that maybe didn't exist before, and show that this is a choice that they can make. This is an opportunity that exists for them. And I think it's a big responsibility of someone with my sort of background, but it's really, everybody in this room is hugely lucky and is the benefit of an education system that they didn't build, and of a plumbing system, an electrical system, and a legal system, and all of that stuff. We're the lucky recipients of those things. And I think it gives each of us the obligation to at least educate one child you've never met, if not as many as you possibly can. I just think everybody should be. Yes, sir?
You mentioned pulling your knees up and doing thousands of somersaults in space.
Yeah.
Do you get dizzy in space like you do here?
The question is, when you do those somersaults in space, do you get dizzy? Not like you do on Earth, because on Earth you have the constant acceleration of gravity that is moving the little motion sensors, the little hairs that are on your inner ear, the 3 orthogonal canals, because they help me balance, right? They help you not fall over with your eyes closed. You can tell which way's up because they're constantly being bent by the acceleration, or at least the force of gravity. When you're weightless, then all those little hairs are just sitting there. So they don't get the conflicting information of the spin of your body and the acceleration of the Earth. So you become less motion sick. However, when you're spinning and all of those hairs initially show the acceleration of the start of the spin, once you get to steady state spin, then all of those hairs go back to neutral. And as soon as you stop, then the hairs go, whoa, and they bend the other way because the fluid has inertia in your inner ear. When your eyeballs say, oh, I've stopped, your inner ear says, you haven't stopped, you're still spinning. And so your body has to deal with this big dichotomy of senses, and your body says, something is seriously wrong, because his eyeballs are saying one thing, his inner ear is saying another thing. Your body has only 1 million-year evolutionary conclusion, and that is, you ate something poisonous. You've eaten a neurotoxin. Throw up now, because it's killing you. And so that's why your body makes you motion sick and makes you want to go lie down. Your body says, get rid of the poison and stop metabolizing it so fast. And that's why we feel nauseous and tired when we're motion sick. But it passes more quickly up there because you don't have the acceleration of gravity. So yeah, you get used to it. Early on in NASA testing, they actually went to a school for the deaf because these deaf people had been born without all of that functioning on their inner ears, and so they didn't have the same balance mechanism that we have, and so they were impossible. You could not make those people motion sick. They didn't have the plumbing to be motion sick, and so they did a lot of testing on those folks in order to try and understand how the human body works when they were building spaceships initially, comparing those to normally configured people. Let me just see. I think we're probably about out of time. Yeah, it's 10 o'clock. Maybe one more question. Yes, ma'am.
Earth-based.
What's the favorite adventure I've had here on the surface of the Earth? Favorite adventure. I was in the delivery room for the birth of all 3 of our kids. That's a spectacular thing to see. I mean, I was useless in there. I wasn't serving any purpose. I was, trying to be good psychological support for my wife. And boy, she has a grip. Wow, it was impressive. But that's to see that natural flow of the process of life was hugely thought-provoking for me. I've traveled a lot. I've been all over the place. I got to meet everybody, which is a great privilege. Got to know the world reasonably well. I've been around the world 2,600 times. So every place looks a little different to me. It looks familiar. I get deja vu everywhere. But I think it's the interpersonal stuff. I toured Europe for 6 months, and a friend and I did it together. And I think I would have missed almost everything if I'd been there by myself. I think the ability to grab the person next to you and go, wow, look at that. What does that mean to you? This is what it means to me. I think it is not only the exploration, but the sharing of the information, the sharing of not just the data, but what it means to us, what you think about it. Why is that important to me? Why is it important to you? To me, that is always the very best of my memories. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thanks so much, Chris. I think we're going to do a little pick up here. Why don't we do it in front of this thing, and then we'll wrap this up. Yeah. That was extremely inspiring, Chris. Lots and lots to think about and to incorporate into our lives. Yes.
Yeah, right in front of the FB. We sit on it?
Okay. Well, what could go wrong?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.